What is going on, everyone? John Kelly here, fightnumbers.com, here to talk UFC 247. What's going on, Chapman? I'm tuning in from Orlando on a work trip this week. Looking forward to the card. Yeah, absolutely. Going to be a fun card. As per usual, we're going to break down the fights from a Draftkings perspective. We're going to talk a little sports betting as well, some of my favorite bets on the card. This is a really interesting card. You know, I've seen a lot of people kind of talking it up like, John Jones, he's just going to roll. It's going to be a boring pay-per-view, not super stacked. Honestly, I think this pay-per-view card has, better quality than the Conor McGregor card outside of the main event. So, and I think there's some interesting spots here. We got a couple dogs I like, some small underdogs and other stuff that we'll get into. But so basically we're going to talk fights like we always do. If this is the first time joining us, that's exactly what Tony said. Yeah, good point, Brett. He's not wrong. He's not lying to you. So I'm excited for the card on Saturday. Going to be a good one. Starts at 6:30, the early prelims. I think the prelims are on at 8 on ESPN. And then obviously the main card, 10 o'clock pay-per-view, ESPN+. So as per usual, we're going to talk fights. We're going to talk DraftKings. Going to go fight by fight. I'm going to basically talk about how I see the fight playing out. Talk about, DraftKings, what fights to target, what fighters that I like. And then obviously some where I see some value in the betting markets as well. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me in the chat all day long. Whatever's on your mind, go ahead and get crazy. I know sometimes people get a little wild in the chat. Somebody last week was talking about Ronda Rousey and some other stuff. So we have a good time here. Thanks for joining us. So without further ado, we can get started. Let me bring up Best Fight Odds, the go-to for betting odds. I use this every single week for my research. This is going to be when I talk about odds. This is what I'm referencing, and then obviously we'll get into DraftKings as well. First fight up on the card is going to be Austin Lingo versus Zalal. I forget his first name. Youssef Zalal. So basically, these guys are both making their UFC debut here. I like Austin Lingo quite a bit. A couple things about him. Austin, first of all, I think he has an awesome nickname, Lights Out. Austin Lights Out Lingo. He's making his UFC debut, trains out of Fortis MMA. So he's the local guy. He's going to have the hometown on his side. He was ranked as the #1 featherweight in the state of Texas, and he's been fighting in LFA. And now they're finally bringing him over to the UFC. So I actually think he has a pretty bright future in the UFC. Still, obviously, has some growing to do, but that'll come with experience. But I do like him. I think he has some talent, and he's could be a guy to watch out for here in the next few years. Only 2 of his 7 pro fights have gone the distance. He has 3 knockouts, 2 submission victories. Overall, he's pretty well-rounded. He's got a nice jab. He's obviously got a heavy right hand. Like I said, he owns a couple knockouts, and he hits pretty hard. So I expect him to have a really significant advantage on the feet in this one. Zalal, he trains out of good camp as well. He's trained out of Factory X Muay Thai in Colorado. He's basically a grappler. He has a few decent chokes, 5 submission victories on his record. But he did drop 2 consecutive losses prior to his last fight, where he dropped the guy with a flying knee, which obviously, MMA is high variance, but flying knee knockout, kind of fluky, especially if you're basically a grappler. So I just think, he's not really UFC ready yet. I think the line here is warranted, and I think we're actually getting a little bit of value on the Lingo side, as I believe he wins this one pretty comfortably and probably even gets a finish. This fight as a whole is -140 not to go to decision, despite either fighter never being finished. So that's interesting. I think Lingo gets the job done, though, and I think getting plus money on his inside distance line is a pretty good bet. We'll see what it was at. I think it was +150 when I was looking at this before. Lingo wins inside the distance. Yeah, +150. So open at plus 159, hasn't really moved, touch 130 a little bit. So hasn't really moved too much drastically. I think getting plus money on his inside distance line is pretty good value. Like I said, I think he gets the knockout. If you don't think he gets the knockout, I would still hit the 210 because, like I said, I feel pretty confident he does win this one. Next fight up on the card is going to be Andre Ewell versus Jonathan Martinez. Anyone that's listened to me before talk about Andre Ewell fights, I'm never impressed with Andre Ewell. He's just like super vanilla. He's coming in as a minus 130 favorite here. The comeback on Jonathan Martinez is plus 110. I'm just never impressed with Andre Ewell. He's a rangy striker. He has a decent 1-2, but that's pretty much where it ends with him. He's not a finisher. He doesn't have a ton of power, doesn't look to wrestle or grapple. So that really limits his upside in terms of Draftkings scoring. He's coming off the knockout loss to Marlon Chito Vera, my boy, and he's now lost 2 of his last 3 fights. So Martinez, on the other hand, I believe it was the California card where they had a bunch of the Team Alpha fighters on that card. Jonathan Martinez had the high knee knockout victory against Pingwan Liu. Ewell's range and jab could pose a problem for Martinez, but I think, Martinez isn't lost on the feet. He has some good kicks at range. He has some decent power. And obviously, as you see, he's able to knock people out. He pretty much, I think, is one of the stronger dogs on the card. He holds the wrestling and grappling advantage as well. I just think he's a more well-rounded fighter than Andre Ewell. Like I said, he's pretty much just a boxer, and he tends to gas out the longer the fight goes. So if that's the case, I think I wouldn't be surprised to see Martinez get another finish. Like I said, I think he's one of the better underdog plays on the slate. I'll be mixing him into some parlays as well. And I even like the straight-up bet at plus 110. Martinez by decision is the official pick in this one. Next fight up on the card, Journey Newsome versus Domingo Pilarte. This is another one where I like the dog here. This fight as a whole, plus 150, not to go to decision. But Domingo Pilarte, if you don't know about him, he came off Dana White Contender Series, got the submission victory in that Dana White Contender Series fight. He was actually rocked really early in that, rebounded well, did get the finish, got the contract. He came out, his UFC debut was against Felipe Colares. That is the same Felipe Colares that just got absolutely destroyed by Montel Jackson 2 weeks ago in UFC Raleigh. I was at that fight. It was an absolute beating. But Colares has a chin. You can't deny that. But it was Pilarte's debut when he fought Felipe Colares. And so it's possible the UFC jitters played a factor there, but man, he did not look good. Colares was able to pressure him and basically steal a split decision, even though he got dominated in the 3rd round. I thought Pilartes probably won the fight 29-28, but you let it get to the judges and you don't look great, especially early on. Those things can happen. So like I said, I had Pilarte winning the 2nd and 3rd round, but regardless, doesn't matter. He was a 325 favorite. It should have never been that close, especially against a guy who many people don't think is a UFC caliber fighter in Felipe Colares. But going back to Pilarte, he's a rangy southpaw. He has some slick grappling, and that's basically how he's made it to the UFC, is by relying on those BJJ skills. But he's only a purple belt. So similar to Michael Chiesa, like everyone thinks and he is a great grappler, but it's like then you look, you're like, oh, he must be a black belt. And then you look and you're like, oh, wait, he's only a purple belt. But he's a super slick purple belt, so you can't just diminish his grappling skills. The only thing about Pilartes is he does put himself in some compromising positions, and I'm not sure how great of a chin he has. As Morales on the Contender Series fight did have him rocked, like I said. Felipe Colares was able to definitely land some punches as well. And he's got a tough opponent here. Journey Newsome has excellent cardio. He's a good striker. He's a brown belt in BJJ. He stepped in on short notice to face Ricardo Ramos. I was very impressed with him in that fight. considering the circumstances. Short notice fight against an up and coming prospect in Ricardo James, who's a good striker. You could make an argument that he was actually winning that fight until he ate a spinning back elbow from Ramos, and that basically turned the tides in that fight. But man, I was really impressed with him. He's going to be smaller here. I think he's only like 5'6" or something like that, 5'7", 5'8", something like that. And Pilarte is like 6 feet tall, very long. Reminds me of Violent Bob Ross a little bit, how he's just super tall and lanky. But like I said, he's a much better striker. So I think he'll have a significant advantage for as long as this plays out on the feet. And if it does go to the ground, and I think it will at some point, Newson is a really good scrambler. So I think he'll be able to scramble out of positions. He's definitely going to be able to hold his own defensively, grappling, and offensively. Did have Ricardo Ramos in a tight guillotine choke twice during that fight. At one point, I actually thought he was going to end it with a guillotine. So don't sleep on this guy. I think he's pretty good. And all things considered, I have to favor him in this fight as the better striker, better cardio, and the more durable fighter, especially since I consider the grappling to be pretty much even, which I do. And so Newson by decision is the official pick. We are getting plus money on him, so I do like that bet as well at plus 110. And then in terms of DraftKings, just because we haven't looked at that yet, let's go to Pilarte Newson. Yeah, so this is what I mentioned, the loss, Pilarte against Colares. So that's the other thing I want to talk about is he doesn't land in volume. I mentioned his kicks, but he's looking to grapple. The problem is if you don't get your takedowns and your advances, you're not scoring well if you're not throwing in volume. He landed 11 significant strikes over the course of 3 rounds. So if you're playing Pilarte, I know he's cheap enough in the mid-range at 8,200, but if you're playing him, just know that there is a ton of risk even if he wins, because if he doesn't get those takedowns and he doesn't get those advances, then he's not going to score well at all. I mean, he could score 50 points in a win, realistically. So I favor Newson for the upside, and because I just think he's the better fighter. Tough matchup for Pilarte. I'm on Team Newson here. Catching up in the chat, Voca Jolly Boy said, who had the better UFC career, Ben Askren or CM Punk? I believe that's a repeat question. We might have to throw you out for the repeat question, but I still go with Ben Askren. Funky Ben changed the game, even though he couldn't win very often. I still love Ben Askren, man. He's a trip. Jolly Boy, glad to see you up for the free cash. Heard you took a beating betting Cowboy. Yeah, big. He was big on Cowboy in that fight. Unfortunately, I'm here to pad my bankroll. John, how tall are you? I'm 5'10", buddy. So I don't know what you're insinuating there. Well, you came to the right place. Also, check out fightnumbers.com. Yeah, I appreciate the shout out. So we're three fights through the card. 3 fights through the card. We'll keep it rolling here. That's the early prelims. So now we can move along to the prelims. First fight on that, and I'm going by best fight odds order because I know 2 of the fights were replacement fights, so it messed up the order on UFC.com. So I might be out of order on this, but I'm just going on best fight odds because that was the way that I capped them and broke it down. Next fight up is going to be Miles John versus Mario Bautista. This is going to be a good one. Miles John's currently minus 140. The comeback on Bautista is plus 120. So this is 2, right prospects, I would say. Miles John's undefeated, coming in as the slight favorite, and coming off his UFC debut win against the previously undefeated Cole Smith in his own backyard of Canada. Smith was, and that fight was interesting. John struggled to get anything going early, but eventually he started to have a lot of success on the feet when he finally started to let his hands go. And that was something that his coaches, that's the thing that stuck out to me about Johns is he really listens to his coaches, which is important. There was a couple times, they told him, hey, John, Miles, you need to let your hands go. And once he listened to them, he really started to have a lot of success. It changed the course of the fight. There was another time where he had Cole Smith was trying to ride his back, and his coaches are giving him advice and, just the wherewithal to be able to not just try to listen from where he was, but he actually walked over right to his corner so he can hear their instruction and listen to them. So those type of stuffs, I think, it's the small things like that kind of impress me about a fighter, especially at a young stage in his career. But he trains out of a good camp. Another Fortis MMA guy. He's going to have the local, the hometown narrative for sure. But he has a decent jab. His overhand right's pretty strong, but that alone isn't going to be enough against Mario Bautista. He has a really strong chin. We've seen him engage into a war. He likes the slugfest. I think John should look to lean on his wrestling base, and I think he will. That's easily his biggest advantage here and his best path to victory. Batista's coming off his first UFC win against Jin Soo Sun, which was an absolute bloodbath, where basically they both just stood in the middle of the octagon and just traded blows for 15 minutes. Really fun fight. If you haven't checked that out, that was a good one. I can't remember if that was like October, August, September, sometime in the fall, I think. But he fights out of MMA Lab, pretty well rounded. His other fight was his debut was against Corey Sandhagen, where he did take Corey Sandhagen down, and then he got armbarred. But that's against Corey Sandhagen, one of the guys who I consider to be one of the best in the division. So I'm not going to fault him too much for that. Ultimately, though, I think, I could see John's landing multiple takedowns. I think he will. But Bautista is a good scrambler, so I think it could be one of those where we just see John's take him down, not really be able to hold him down. Bautista scramble back to his feet, land a couple blows, John's take him down, and rinse and repeat, basically. So, but I mentioned John's is out of Fortis MMA. A lot of Texas guys on this card. He's going to have the hometown narrative. I think the takedowns will give him the edge in the scorecards. So John's by decision is the official pick. And they're both cheap enough to where you can target them on DraftKings, especially if you think John's is going to land multiple takedowns, maybe get a couple advances. And Bautista's cheap enough where he doesn't necessarily need takedowns and advances to pay off his tag. But John's by decision is the official pick in that one. But I am 5'10", 5'10" in heels. Yeah, right, buddy. I'm more like a 6 foot. I measure 5'9", but I feel like I'm 6 foot. No, thoughts on Colby Covington interview with Ariel Helwani? I loved it. I think Colby's certainly a character, whether you like him or not. He is very entertaining. He talked about the Mark. He calls him Mark Not So Goodard for the fight against Kamaru Usman. If you didn't watch that interview with Ariel Helwani, I definitely recommend it. Very, very entertaining, Colby Covington. But we'll stick to UFC 247. Next fight up on the card is going to be Alex Morono versus Callan Williams. This is one that was added late. Morono minus 300 favorite here. The comeback on Williams plus 250. Obviously, as you can see, once the replacement was named, it's basically been steamed by Morono the entire time. And for good reason. I don't have a lot on this fight. Morono's on a 3-fight win streak. He now gets to face Williams coming in on short notice to make his UFC debut. And from what I've seen from Williams, I really don't think he poses many threats for a seasoned fighter like Alex Morono. Morono's the more technical striker. He's a BJJ black belt. The only real chance I think Williams has is if he catches Morono with like a random power shot. But we know Morono has a decent chin, so it's like I'd be pretty surprised if that happened personally. But Morono's inside distance line is only plus 280. And that's really the biggest interest I have in this fight is just from a betting perspective. I think there's some value in that plus 280 just because he has multiple paths here. Morono likes to wing bombs. He's the local guy as well. He's from Texas, so, he's going to have the crowd behind him. He wants to put on a show. He has a nice overhand right as well. And then he's a black belt, so it's like he always has submissions that he can go to. Like I said, I think there's value in this in his plus 280 inside distance line. The fight as a whole is plus 105 not to go to decision. Morono by decision is the official pick. I just think he's a little bit too expensive on DraftKings. I think he's like 9K, 9,200, something like that. We'll check it out quick. 9,100. I think it's a little pricey for not a really good inside distance line. It is what it is, though. I mean, he is capable of getting finishes, and he's fighting some low-level competition here in his home state. So I'll have exposure, but I also run about 20 lineups each week. So, yeah. Next fight up on the card is going to be Andrea KGB Lee versus Lauren Murphy. This is another one where it's pretty straightforward for me. I'm a KGB Lee fan, not just for her looks, for the record. Opened as a 305 favorite. It's been steamed to 345. I just don't think Lauren Murphy really has anything for her. Lee's coming off her first loss in the octagon against Joanne Calderwood in what was a competitive decision. I always think, I love Joanne Calderwood. I always think she's underrated. I think she fought a really good game plan against Andrea Lee, so I'm not really reading too much into that loss. But in this fight with Lauren Murphy, from a stylistic standpoint, Lee is better than Murphy pretty much everywhere this fight goes. And I mentioned how many Texas fighters we have. She's going to have the hometown pop as well. And I think she's actually from Louisiana, but she's very popular in Texas. She's the better striker, the better wrestler, the better grappler, and she has a 3-inch reach advantage, which she has a very nice jab, so that reach advantage is going to come into play. And then Lauren Murphy's also older. She wears the damage a lot worse. So it is what it is. I think Lee wins here pretty comfortably. I think the line is a little bit wide. The problem is, and she has the better gas tank. She's super active on the feet, lands over 5 significant strikes per minute, and she's able to do that over the course of 3 rounds. So, the slower, older Murphy, I just don't think she's going to be able to keep up. I think this is going to be all Andrea Lee. Like I said, the problem is in DraftKings is she's too expensive, and she's priced expensive because she's such a big favorite. Even with her decent volume on the feet, though, it's tough for her to pay off this price without getting a finish. So for that reason, I like to bet more than I like to play on DraftKings. And Lee to win by decision was minus 170, which I thought was a nice leg to add to parlays. Let's see if it moved at all. I think I looked at it yesterday and it was minus 170. Lee by decision. Minus 160. So you're getting a little bit better. Lee by decision minus 160. I think that's a good leg to add to parlays. Like I said, I think she wins pretty comfortably, just a bit too expensive in terms of DraftKings. Next fight up on the card is going to be Antonio Arroyo versus Trevin Giles. Trevin Giles, another hometown Texas boy. I think in every single fight, there's at least one Texas guy. I could be wrong. Maybe the Bektik-Ige fight. I don't think there's a Texas guy in that. But pretty much other than that, that's the only one. But, yeah. Trevin Giles, Antonio Arroyo. Trevin Giles coming in as a slight favorite here. The comeback on Arroyo is plus 115. Yeah, Trevin Giles minus 135. I mentioned he's the hometown guy, fighting out of Houston, Texas. He looked like a stud early on in his career, but now he's coming off 2 straight losses, both of which were 3rd-round submissions, which is interesting. And I don't think it's because he's a bad grappler. He's actually a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's just I think his stamina was really what got to him in those fights. He's a good boxer, but his gas tank is his biggest weakness, in my opinion. So that's concerning. You never feel too confident when you're backing fighters that have questionable cardio issues. But his opponent, Arroyo here, is a southpaw striker by nature that will throw a ton of kicks. That's pretty much all he does at range is just spam kicks. And he is powerful, though. He just doesn't land in volume. And that's what's concerning with him. But his kicks, they do damage when they land. So, and and then, if the fight plays out on the mat, I mentioned Giles' last two losses came by submission. Arroyo owns 4 submission victories to his record. So that's possible too. I don't think he's going to necessarily look to take the fight there. But, obviously as it plays out on the feet, I think Giles is the more active and technical striker. And, I mentioned the volume being a concern for Arroyo. Outside of like one of those, his big body kicks, outside of one of them doing damage or like a random one punch knockout, I just don't really see Giles losing this one. I think he's the more active striker, the better striker, the more technical striker. And I just think he outpoints him on the feet. So as long as he doesn't gas out, I don't think he loses this one. And the thing about Arroyo is he also struggles to defend takedowns. So he actually has multiple paths to losing here. I think Giles could piece him up on the feet. And I think if he wants to, he could take him down as well. So this fight as a whole is minus 155 not to go to decision. So a finish on either side wouldn't be like the most surprising thing ever. But again, I keep going back to the concern with Arroyo. He doesn't throw enough volume. I like to get behind the fighters that are very active because even if they do lose, they have a higher floor. He's basically, kick, liver shot, head kick, knockout, or bust, in my opinion. And those are the guys that I generally just don't get behind. I actually think Giles might be able to drop him on the feet. So that's the official pick. I'll go Giles by knockout in his home state of Texas. And that should wrap up the prelims. Yep. So now we're on to the pay-per-view card. This is where it definitely gets fun for me. We have Derek, my balls is hot, Lewis versus Ilir Latifi. Obviously, everybody loves Derek Lewis. He's a fan favorite. Minus 245 favorite here. It's actually moving in the wrong direction a little bit. Not too much. The comeback on Latifi, plus 205. This fight as a whole is minus 285 not to go to decision. Lewis has one of the best inside distance lines on the slate, currently at minus 145. That's pretty strong for 9K. And he's facing Latifi, who's moving up to heavyweight here. And obviously, Derek Lewis is the hometown. He is Texas. So he is the hometown guy. He's a fan favorite everywhere he goes, but especially in his home state of Texas. So this is going to be a great way to kick off the pay-per-view. It definitely seems like the UFC is throwing him the lob here to get a big knockout win in front of his home state of Texas. I mentioned Latifi moving up to heavyweight. He is powerful, but he's going to be at a massive size disadvantage here. He's about 6 inches shorter on a good day than Derek Lewis, and he'll have a 5.5 reach disadvantage. So, and the last thing with Lewis is like, what does Lewis do well? Well, sorry, I got sidetracked there. Wrong video was playing on my phone. What does he do well? He hits hard. He hits like a truck. Even in fights that he's losing, he's never out of the fight because he always has that big right hand that could just drop anybody at any time. And Latifi has had his bell rung multiple times over the course of his career, and that was at a lighter weight class. Now he's moving up to heavyweight to face not just a heavyweight puncher, but one of the heaviest heavyweight punchers in Derek Lewis. So it just seems kind of foolish on Latifi's part. Like I said, it seems like the UFC is kind of setting this up for Derek Lewis, which I'm fine with. I like Derek Lewis. I think he's entertaining. The official pick is Lewis by knockout. Like I said, he's very strong inside distance line for 9K on DraftKings. The only thing I will mention is that, you've seen in multiple other fights, I mentioned the third round finishes. If the finish does come in the third round, then it's possible that Derek Lewis, who doesn't land in high volume, could bust his 9K price tag. That is possible. So it's not just one of those things where you see, only 9K, really strong inside distance line, just lock him in every lineup. No, he's a strong tournament play because yes, he very likely could get an early finish, but he also could very likely do the Derek Lewis thing where he doesn't throw a ton of volume and maybe drops him later in the fight. And that just won't do it if he doesn't get the knockdown or get heavy volume. I'm going to be targeting him moderately. So I just want you guys to know there are paths to him failing here, even if he gets the knockout win, which I think he will. But yeah, proceed with caution. I'll say on that. I don't want you guys to like lock button him by any means. Yeah, Chapman says, dude, Lewis scares me when he fights. He looks so tired and on the verge of getting finished. Yeah, that's a completely accurate statement. I will say his last fight out, he changed up his diet for that fight, and his cardio did look a lot better. So that could be an interesting narrative going forward. He said basically he cut out. He was on the Errol Hawani show a couple months ago, and he said he cut out. I forget, crawfish. No, it wasn't crawfish. He just ate crawfish with Brett Okamoto. That's what made me think of crawfish. But he said he cut out something like pasta or Bojangles. It was something like that. But he did change up his diet. His cardio looked better. But yeah, never count Derek Lewis out of the fight. Lewis by knockout is the official pick in that one, and we can move on. I don't have a ton of interest in Latifi just because I think moving up, being so massively undersized, I think it's just too many hurdles for him to overcome. Next fight up on the card, Dan Ige versus Mirsad Bektic. Bektic minus 135 favorite. The comeback on Ige is plus 115. Bektic, this one, I've seen a lot of people go back and forth on this one. Bektic seemed like he was, everybody's next favorite prospect at 145 early on in his career, but the hype has definitely died down after getting knocked out by Darren Elkins. And then last fight out got knocked out by Josh Emmett. So that's 2 knockout losses in his last 4 fights. But you can't really overlook him. He stays active when he's fighting in terms of inside the octagon. He lands over 3.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. But, this isn't the matchup where you're going to be able to have a wrestling advantage against a guy like Dan Ige. And I don't think he's going to be able to land that many takedowns. Dan Ige, I think, is one of the up-and-comers in this division. He's a strong wrestler and grappler himself. He's coming in on a 4-fight win streak and has basically looked better in every single one of his fights. I've been on him, I think, his last 3 fights, and he hasn't let me down. So I really do like Dan Ige. He's a brown belt in judo, black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and on the feet, yeah, Bektic is probably the more smooth and technical striker, but he's not active enough. I always go back to how active they are. He lands like 3 significant strikes per minute. So even if Ige maybe isn't the better striker per se, just his volume alone, I think, and his pressure is really, I think, going to pay dividends here. I think we see Ige win in the wrestling and grappling exchanges, and I think on the feet, his pressure makes a difference as well. So aside from being the inferior grappler, Bektic also has chin issues. So, there's 2 things that I always worry about when backing fighters. It's if they have cardio issues and it's if they have chin issues. And we talked about Trevin Giles, possibly cardio issues. Bektic, possibly chin issues. Knocked out in 2 of his last 4. The one by Emmett in his last fight, it was just a jab that set him down. And I know Josh Emmett hits very hard, but it's generally his right hand that hits very hard. This was just a jab. And it was a solid jab, but it really sat Bektic down. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have some concerns about Bektic for sure. I think for all those reasons and the cheaper price tag on DraftKings, I'm on Ige here. It should be a competitive matchup, so it's not like a lock button by any means. Ige by decision is the official pick, though, and I like that bet. Plus 115, the plus money on Dan Ige. And I'm just going to check to see if, fight doesn't go decision plus 115, so that didn't move. Neither guy really has great inside distance lines, but Ige's is better, as you can see, plus 220, and that's actually trending even better, man. Wow, that's actually impressive. I think I looked at it on Monday, Monday, and it was plus 270. So now it's trending even more to plus 220. So that's interesting. But I do like Ige overall to win, as I said. All right. Next fight up on the card is going to be Juan Adams versus Justin Tafa, heavyweight matchup here. Juan Adams minus 245 favorite. The comeback on Tafa, 205. This one should be fun. Juan Adams, we here's another situation, I think, where the UFC is trying to build up the local fighter, get him a nice win in front of his home state, as Juan Adams fights out of Houston, Texas, and he's lost his last two fights. Obviously, the last one came against Greg Hardy, where he wanted that Greg Hardy fight for years. They trash talking, all that stuff. And then he gets out there. They each land like a jab or two. And then he goes in on a single leg and basically just sits there. Hardy stuffs it. He goes to his knees and he just holds that single leg and lets Greg Hardy smash his head in and knock him out. So, that was poor fight IQ for sure. But definitely seems like a good rebound spot for him here. Justin Tafa is basically just a one-dimensional power puncher. He only has 4 professional fights. He's coming up off a knockout loss to Yorgan De Castro in his debut, where he basically just tried to rush in and swing bombs. But in the course of doing that, he ate a very heavy right hand that literally, I think it actually put him to sleep before he even hit the mat. So both of these fighters are very hittable. That's one thing I definitely noticed through the course of all of Juan Adams' fights, even his debut against Chris De La Roca. He's very hittable, very, very hittable. So it's a heavyweight fight. Everyone always has a puncher's chance. Is it possible Justin Tafa hits him with something tough and knocks him out? Sure. Is it something I'm going to bet on? Not really. Tafa looked like a decent boxer against Castro. So it wouldn't be super shocking. It's a heavyweight fight, but I just have to favor Adams here. With the strong wrestling background, wrestled at Virginia Military Institute in college. If he uses that wrestling, and I think he will, he's generally tried to in all of his fights. I think he'll dominate Tafa on the mat and possibly finish him later on in the rounds. Or further the fight goes. So I'm actually I'm going Adams by a TKO via ground and pound. That's my official pick in this one. He has a strong inside distance line, minus 135. That's really strong for 8.8K on DraftKings, and that's something that I just can't overlook. So I mentioned the risk there. It's a heavyweight fight. They could always, get knocked out regardless of how good the matchup is for them and how much of a favorite they are. So, I mean, maybe I'll have one or two of Tafa in the event that happens. I probably will, because I'm going to be targeting Juan Adams pretty heavily. And I know that's scary. Whenever you have confidence in low-level heavyweights, which I would consider them to be low-level heavyweights, but it's too much for me to pass. The inside distance line, the price on DraftKings, and just the matchup in general, wrestling background, I always like that as well. Takedown upside, advances, there's just so many paths for Juan Adams here that I think he's a really strong play and one of my favorite tournament plays on the slate. And that doesn't mean that it's a lock. It's going to come with risk, as does every heavyweight fight, as I said, but I do think Juan Adams gets the win here. Next fight up on the card is going to be Caitlin Chookagian, everybody's favorite blonde fighter, versus Valentina Shevchenko. Shevchenko minus 1,100 favorite. The comeback on Chookagian plus 700. I mean, there's really not much to say in this one. Such a massive favorite for Shevchenko. No shock that she's the most expensive fighter on the slate. She's a world-class striker. She's a black belt in judo. She's all that in a bag of chips. There's never a bad thing to say about Valentina Shevchenko. She's just super well-rounded. And I just don't really see that in Caitlin Chookagian. Chookagian's made a living off of dancing around the outside and doing her karate with every single strike. And I don't know if that makes the judges if that makes them think she's landing more than she does. It seems like Fight Metric definitely does, because it's like every time Like that fight against Joanne Calderwood, I thought Calderwood won 2 of those rounds clearly. But even if she lost, the significant strikes, I'm like, I didn't see her land. Like, what did they say? I'll pull it up. It's on DraftKings, the game logs, but I think they had her landing like 70 or 80 significant strikes in that fight. And watching the fight, I'm like, there is no way. She probably landed like 40. Joanne Calderwood, significant strikes. Yeah, 82 against Joanne Calderwood. So, so yeah, maybe her little head trick does the trick to sway the judges. I don't know, but like I said, I mean, I just don't think she has anything for Shevchenko here. She is a brown belt in BJJ, but she doesn't use it very often. Like I said, she likes to land. She likes to throw in volume, whether it lands or not, and just kind of dance around the outside, jump in and out of the pocket, land a couple, jump back to the outside, and go on her merry way. So the problem with that is it's not going to work against someone as good or as talented as Valentina Shevchenko. So everybody knows Shevchenko is going to win this. That's not the discussion here. The real decision is whether or not we want to pay up for her on DraftKings. And honestly, despite not having a good inside distance line, plus 160 is her inside distance line, she is active enough to pay off her salary, even in a decision, if it does go 5 rounds. She's, just like I said, she's active enough, and that's the key. We've seen her score over 500 or over 100, in a 5-round decision. She did against Joanna 3 fights ago. She did against she scored 92 against Holly Holm in a 5-round decision. So, I mean, even in a decision, she does have the upside to score over 100 points. I wish she was a little bit cheaper, but being such a massive favorite, it's no surprise why they did price her up so high. I think she wins. I think she wins by decision. I'm going to have exposure on DraftKings, but I think she's just too expensive to be targeted too heavily. And for those reasons, I just have to get some exposure, but not going crazy there. I think what was I saying? Oh, I think I'm going to have her in any John Jones, in any lineups that don't have John Jones. I'm going to have her. So if you're targeting Reyes at all, and we'll get to that fight next, I think you should pair those lineups with Valentina Shevchenko. That's what I knew I was forgetting something. That was it. All right, main event: John Jones versus Dominic Reyes. And this is another one where it's like, what can you really say here? John Jones is the greatest fighter of all time, basically. Regardless of how you feel about him, I think we're getting a nice price tag at minus 440. And I think that's actually a little bit low due to recency bias, since he wasn't super dominant against Thiago Santos. And although, Dominic Reyes, southpaw, good striker, knocking people out, he's undefeated. But this is definitely, this is everyone's toughest competition they'll ever face, but certainly Dominic Reyes' toughest competition he'll ever face. I think he'll need to kind of use that blueprint that Santos laid out by attacking those legs of John and just, over the course of 5 rounds, if it goes that late, just wearing down his legs, getting John off of his game plan. And I think Santos was doing that. And obviously, he injured himself, and maybe the fight would have went differently. But I think that's the path here is to try to get John off his game, try to get him uncomfortable, start beating up those legs. In that fight against Santos, he had to switch to orthodox quite a bit because that lead leg was beat up so bad. So I think that's definitely something that Reyes should look to. Aside from that, Reyes always has his big left hand. John Jones talked about it in the Ariel Helwani interview, how, all Reyes has is his left hand. He does have a heavy left hand, but John has a great chin. He ate every single one of Santos's heavy strikes and was never even wobbled. He's ate plenty of big hits in the past and never wobbled. This guy it seems like he's unbreakable. And so I just think, overall, I just think John Jones is the most talented fighter. He still is the most talented fighter in this division. I expect his forward pressure to be too much for Dominic Reyes over the course of 25 minutes if it goes that long. And John's the type of fighter that just gets better as the fight goes on. He starts off slow. He's everything he's doing. It's to get information from his opponent. And then over the course of 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, he just slowly but surely starts to break you. And so I think, this fight isn't going to play out any differently. I think Jones by decision is the official pick. I think getting him at plus 285 or plus 285, you can bet him at plus 285 if for unanimous decision. That's what I like. There's plus 285 unanimous decision for Jones. I think that's the value if you think it goes all 5 rounds. Regardless, he's a strong play on DraftKings, even though he busted that price tag last time out against Santos. I think it's more likely that we see him kind of rebound to where he's usually at. Other than the Santos fight, he's generally scoring over 100 points, 108, 89, 103, 110, 91, 114, 102, 115. So, and a lot of those were 5-round decisions. So, expect a lot of elbows, a lot of lead front kicks, a lot of forward pressure. I think John Jones gets the job done. I like mixing him into parlays. And as I mentioned, I think plus 285 for Jones to win by unanimous decision it is a good bet as well. And then as for Reyes, I mentioned it before, any lineups, if you're going to have lineups that don't have John Jones, it makes sense to pick Dominic Reyes, even if you don't think he wins in any non-John Jones lineups, because it saves so much salary. And then on the off chance that he does, pull the surprise against John Jones, obviously you need to have him. So that's how I see this card playing out. Some of my favorite bets, mentioned Austin Lingo, plus 205 by knockout. I like that quite a bit. Plus 150 inside the distance. Like that as well. I like Journey Newson, plus 110. Derek Lewis by knockout, minus 125. Better than his inside distance line. I like Dan Ige, plus 115. And then I mentioned the plus 285, John Jones by unanimous decision. And then a couple of the other ones that I'd mix into parlays is Andrea Lee, and then Juan Adams. I like those two quite a bit. And then obviously John Jones, the minus 440 as well. But that's basically it, guys. That's how I see this fight card breaking down. Going to have, I mentioned on Twitter, if you follow me on Twitter, at John Kelly DFS, I released my new website, fightnumbers.com. Please go check it out if you don't already. A lot of good free information for MMA DFS players and sports gamblers in general on UFC. We're going to have line movement. That gets updated on Saturdays. We're going to have DraftKings player rankings broken down by section. So it's going to be like 9K and up, 8 to 9K, favorite underdogs, stuff like that. And then obviously I'm going to have the article posted as well. I'm going to have the video. You can rewatch the video there. And then ownership projections as well. So, and all of it's free. It's totally free. So definitely check that out, fightnumbers.com. And good luck on this UFC 247 pay-per-view card. And we will see you guys next week. 8 straight weeks of UFC cards. So I will be here providing analysis for each one. But good luck tonight, guys. Thanks for joining. And we will see you next time.